My name is Elias. I've spent the better part of a decade working as a field technician for the Bureau of Land Management. And if there's one thing the desert teaches you, it's that silence has layers. In the city, silence is just a lack of noise. But out here, in the sun-scorched throat of Canyon Diablo, Arizona, silence is a living thing. It's heavy, it's ancient, and it's always watching. Canyon Diablo isn't like the Grand Canyon. It doesn't have the grand sweeping vistas that tourists flock to for photos. It's a jagged, ugly cut in the earth, a limestone scar that looks like it was hacked out by a giant rusted blade. The rocks are a bruised, oxidized red, and the wind that blows through the gaps doesn't just whistle, it moans. The local legends say the canyon was a place where the old gods used to discard the things they were ashamed of creating. After what I saw 3 months ago, I'm starting to think those legends were too optimistic. It was a Tuesday in mid-July, the kind of day where the heat is a physical enemy. The thermometer on my truck's dash had peaked at 114 degrees before the sensor simply gave up. My assignment was straightforward, or so I thought. Find a missing archaeology student named Marcus. He had been out near the northern rim of the canyon documenting undocumented petroglyphs and had missed his check-in by 48 hours. I arrived at the trailhead, which was really just a wide spot in the gravel road, around 6 p.m. The sun was beginning to dip, casting shadows that looked like long skeletal fingers reaching across the canyon floor. I grabbed my pack, checked my water, and made sure my radio was fully charged. Dispatch, this is Elias. I'm at the northern entry point, commencing search for Marcus Thorne. I'll check in every hour, I said into the radio. Copy that, Elias. Be advised, there's a localized storm cell moving in from the west. Keep an eye on the flash flood markers. The voice on the other end crackled. I looked at the sky. It was a clear, vibrating blue. There wasn't a cloud in sight. I chalked it up to a glitch in their radar and started the descent. The path into the Diablo Cut is steep and treacherous. The limestone is brittle, constantly crumbling under your boots, sending small avalanches of red dust into the void below. As I moved deeper, the temperature didn't just drop as the sun vanished, it plummeted. The desert has a way of stealing your warmth the moment you lose sight of the sun. By 9 p.m., I was at the bottom. My headlamp cut a lonely white circle into the absolute blackness of the canyon floor. That's when the silence changed. Usually, you can hear the scuttle of a lizard or the distant hum of a highway. But here, the air felt thick, like I was walking through invisible curtains of wool. I reached Marcus's last known coordinates. His tent was there, pitched in the lee of a massive overhanging rock. It was collapsed, not by the wind, but as if something heavy had sat on it. I shined my light inside. His sleeping bag was still there, unrolled and empty. His boots were tucked neatly in the corner. That was the first red flag. No one in their right mind wanders the Diablo floor at night without boots. I stepped out of the tent and panned my light across the canyon wall. The limestone was covered in carvings, petroglyphs, that shouldn't have been there. They weren't the standard depictions of hunters or bighorn sheep. They were spirals, thousands of them, etched so deep into the rock that they looked like open wounds. And in the center of the spirals was a figure, a tall, spindly shape with too many joints in its arms, reaching upward toward a hole in the sky. "Marcus?" I called out. The echo didn't come back to me. It didn't bounce off the walls. It just disappeared. That's when I heard the first click. Click, clack, click. It was the sound of something hard hitting the limestone. It wasn't a rock falling. It was rhythmic. It was walking. And it was coming from the shadows of a narrow cave entrance just 20 yards to my left. I stood frozen, the beam of my headlamp trembling slightly as it cut through the darkness toward the cave entrance. The clicking sound stopped. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, like the air had been replaced by something thicker, something that carried a faint metallic taste. "Marcus?" I tried again, my voice barely a whisper. This time there was a response. It wasn't a word. It was a groan, a low, grinding sound like two massive slabs of limestone being rubbed together. It came from deep within the narrow slit in the canyon wall. I knew I should wait for the search and rescue team. I knew the protocol. But in the desert, at night, waiting can be a death sentence. If Marcus was in there, injured and without boots, the cold would take him before the sun rose. I adjusted my pack and squeezed into the opening. The walls were tight, the jagged limestone catching on my tactical vest, whispering against the fabric. As I pushed through the first 20 feet, the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. The air smelled of ancient dust and something else, something sweet and sickly, like sun-bleached bone. My light hit the floor of the tunnel. There, imprinted in the fine red dust, were Marcus's footprints. But they weren't the footprints of a man walking. They were deep, jagged ruts, as if he had been dragged. And next to them, there were no handprints. Instead, there were small, circular indentations spaced perfectly apart. The clicks. Help. Me. The voice was hollow. It didn't sound like Marcus. It sounded like a recording of Marcus being played through a broken speaker. It was coming from a chamber just ahead, where the tunnel opened up into a massive bell-shaped cavern. I burst into the chamber, my light panner frantically. The walls here were different. They weren't just carved. They were polished until they shone like dark glass. Thousands of those spirals I had seen outside covered every inch of the ceiling, swirling toward a central point directly above a stone pedestal in the middle of the room. And there was Marcus. He was slumped against the pedestal, his skin the color of ash. He was alive, but his eyes were fixed on the ceiling, his pupils so dilated they looked like twin pools of ink. He was shivering, a rhythmic, mechanical tremor that made his teeth rattle. "Marcus, don't move, I've got you," I said, rushing toward him. I reached out to grab his arm, but as my hand touched his skin, I recoiled. He wasn't cold. He was vibrating. A low-frequency hum was pulsing through his body, so strong it made my own fingernails ache. "Elias," Marcus rasped, his eyes never leaving the ceiling. "It's not a cave. It's a throat. We're in its throat." "Don't talk. Just focus on me," I said, pulling a thermal blanket from my pack. But as I draped it over him, the clicking sound returned. This time, it wasn't coming from the tunnel. It was coming from above. I tilted my head back, my light following the curve of the polished walls up to the center of the spirals. High above us, tucked into a crevice that looked like a jagged wound in the rock, was the guard. It didn't look like a beast. It looked like a sculpture made of obsidian and dried sinew. It was long, impossibly long, with limbs that folded back on themselves like the legs of a praying mantis. It had no face, only a smooth, black surface that reflected my headlamp back at me with a distorted, oily sheen. Its fingers, if you could call them that, were tipped with the same hard, circular points that had made the clicking sound in the dust. It wasn't moving. It was just hanging there, suspended by its claws, watching us with its entire presence. Then, the humming in Marcus's body stopped. The silence that followed was so absolute, it felt like a physical blow. The guard shifted. It didn't fall. It descended, its limbs unfolding in a series of wet, snapping sounds that echoed through the chamber like gunshots. It moved with a terrifying, liquid grace, its hooves, those hard, clicking points, touching the polished floor with the delicacy of a dancer. It stood between us and the exit, a silhouette of jagged angles that seemed to absorb the light from my torch. "Dispatch, this is Elias. Do you copy? I have the subject. We are in a cavern at the northern base. We need immediate." My radio didn't static. It screamed. A high-pitched, harmonic shriek erupted from the speaker, a sound so violent it made my ears bleed. I dropped the radio, the device clattering onto the stone. The guard tilted its head a sharp mechanical jerk. Then, it spoke. It didn't use a voice. It used the sound of my own radio's static, shaping the white noise into words that felt like they were being carved into the inside of my skull. The sun is gone. Elias. The Guard of Canyon Diablo Part 3. The price of the pedestal. I stood paralyzed, the scream of the radio static still ringing in my ears. The guard didn't move toward us. It simply stood there, its obsidian limbs twitching with a rhythmic, insect-like precision. The light from my headlamp seemed to wrap around its body rather than illuminating it, as if the creature were a whole in reality itself. Marcus let out a soft, broken whimper. His hand reached out, clawing at the dust on the floor, but his eyes were still locked onto the guard. "It wants the spirals, Elias," he whispered, his voice sounding like dry parchment rubbing together. "It doesn't want us. It wants the circles to keep turning." I didn't understand what he meant until I looked at the pedestal. In the center of the chamber, the stone pillar wasn't just a rock. Now that I was closer, I could see that the top of it was a shallow basin, filled with a thick, silver liquid that looked like liquid mercury, but moved like it was alive. The liquid was swirling in a slow, clockwise direction, perfectly mimicking the thousands of spirals etched into the ceiling and walls. Every time the liquid completed a rotation, a soft, low-frequency thrum vibrated through the floor, the heartbeat I had felt earlier. The guard took a step closer. Click. Clack. It reached out one of its impossibly long arms. The fingers, those sharp, clicking points, hovered just inches above the silver basin. The creature didn't touch the liquid. Instead, it began to draw its own spiral in the air above it. As it moved, the silver liquid began to pulse with a violet light, the same color I had seen in the shadow cave. "Marcus, we have to move!" "Now," I hissed, grabbing him under the armpits. He was dead weight. It felt like I was trying to lift a statue made of lead. His skin was becoming cold again, but it was a greasy, unnatural cold. I looked down and saw that the red dust on the floor was crawling up his legs, coating his skin in a layer of fine, crystalline sand that looked like it was growing out of his pores. The guard turned its smooth, featureless head toward me. The static from the radio on the floor suddenly changed tone. It softened, becoming a melodic, humming sound. The same commercial jingle I had heard in my head during my first night in the canyon. "Elias, why do you resist the circle?" The voice didn't come from the radio anymore. It came from the silver basin. The liquid was shaping itself into the likeness of a human mouth, its lips moving in perfect synchronization with the distorted electronic words. "I'm taking him out of here," I said, my voice cracking. I reached for the Glock on my hip, but my holster was empty. I looked down, confused. My belt was there, my flashlight was there, but the gun was gone. I looked back at the pedestal. There, resting at the bottom of the silver basin, was my Glock. It wasn't just sitting there, it was being dissolved. The metal was bubbling, turning into more of that shimmering silver liquid. The guard hadn't stolen it. The mountain had claimed it. The guard let out a sound, a sharp, rattling hiss like a disturbed rattlesnake. It lunged forward, not with its body, but with its shadow. The shadow of the creature stretched across the floor with impossible speed, reaching toward my feet. Where the shadow touched the stone, the limestone turned to liquid, bubbling up like a boiling tar pit. "The canyon doesn't want souls, Elias," Marcus suddenly screamed, his eyes finally snapping toward me, filled with a terrifying clarity. "It wants weight. It needs things from the world above to keep the spirals heavy. If the silver stops spinning, the floor opens. Everything opens." As if on cue, the humming from the basin faltered. The silver liquid slowed its rotation. The cavern groaned. A massive crack tore across the ceiling, shedding flakes of polished stone like black snow. The guard began to vibrate, its entire body blurring as it let out a sound of pure mechanical grief. It looked at Marcus, then at me. It realized I was heavier than the student. I had the gear, I had the heavy boots, I had the physical presence of a man who had walked these canyons for years. The creature's obsidian limbs snapped out, grabbing Marcus and tossing him toward the tunnel entrance like he was a rag doll. Marcus hit the wall and slumped down, unconscious but free from the pedestal's pull. Then the guard turned back to me. It didn't look aggressive anymore. It looked desperate. It began to gesture toward the basin, its long fingers beckoning me to step closer. "The circle must turn, Elias, or the Diablo wakes up." I backed away, but the floor behind me was no longer solid. The limestone had turned into a thick red slurry that gripped my boots like quicksand. I was being pulled toward the center, toward the basin, toward the spiral that needed to be fed. The red slurry around my boots felt like hundreds of cold, tiny hands pulling me down. The more I struggled, the faster I sank into the limestone floor. The silver liquid in the basin was barely moving now, just a sluggish, dying ripple, and with every second it slowed, the cavern groaned louder. It wasn't just the sound of rock shifting. It was the sound of something gargantuan beneath the earth turning in its sleep. The guard stood over the basin, its obsidian body trembling. It looked at me, then at the dissolving remains of my gear. It wasn't enough. My radio, my gun, Marcus's backpack, they were just appetizers. The mountain needed a heart. It needed a witness. Stay, Elias. The voice from the basin whispered, now sounding like a choir of 1,000 distorted voices. Be the wait. I looked at Marcus, lying crumpled near the tunnel exit. He was my responsibility. That was the routine of my job, the professional duty I had carried for 6 years. But this wasn't a landslide or a flash flood. This was an ancient debt. I reached into my utility belt one last time. My fingers found the heavy, brass-bound compass my father had given me when I first joined the BLM. It was solid, heavy, and carried the weight of 3 generations of surveyors. It was the most real thing I owned. "You want weight?" I screamed, the red slurry now up to my knees. "Take it." I didn't just drop the compass into the basin. I hurled it with every ounce of strength I had left. The brass hit the silver liquid with a sound like a cathedral bell ringing deep underwater. Bong. The reaction was instantaneous. The silver liquid didn't just spin, it erupted into a violent, glowing vortex. The violet light became so bright it burned through the darkness, illuminating every jagged crack in the ceiling. The guard let out a long, vibrating hum, a sound of satisfaction. The suction on my legs vanished. The red slurry hardened back into solid limestone in a heartbeat, nearly pinning my feet in place. I scrambled, tearing my boots free from the stone, and lunged toward Marcus. I didn't look back at the pedestal. I didn't look back at the guard. I hoisted Marcus over my shoulder, his body still humming with that faint residual vibration, and I ran. The tunnel felt miles longer than it had on the way in. The walls seemed to be breathing, the limestone expanding and contracting as if the canyon were gasping for air. Every time my boots hit the ground, I heard a faint click echoing behind me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. When we finally collapsed onto the desert floor outside the cave, the storm the radio had warned me about had finally arrived. But there was no rain, just a dry, howling wind that carried the scent of ozone and ancient dust. I looked back at the cave entrance. It was gone. The slit in the rock had sealed itself shut, leaving nothing but a smooth, red wall of limestone. There were no petroglyphs, no spirals, just the indifferent face of the Arizona desert under a starless sky. I got Marcus to the hospital in Flagstaff. The doctors said he was suffering from extreme dehydration and a strange type of vibrational trauma they couldn't explain. He recovered, but he never spoke another word. Not about the cave, not about the archaeology, not even to say thank you. He moved back east a month later, and I heard he stopped doing field work entirely. As for me, I kept my job. But I'm different now. I don't carry a compass anymore. I don't trust the North. I spend my nights in the office filing reports and looking at satellite maps. But every once in a while, when the office is quiet and the sun is setting over the rim, I hear it. I'll be sitting at my desk and I'll hear a rhythmic clicking on the linoleum floor. Click, clack, click. And when I check my pockets, I find them filled with fine red limestone dust, even if I haven't left the city in weeks. The mountain didn't take my life that night, but it took my weight. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I feel like I'm becoming a little more translucent, a little more like a shadow. I'm still here, but I'm lighter than I should be. Because I know that somewhere deep in Canyon Diablo, a silver spiral is still turning, and it's only a matter of time before it starts to feel hungry again. And when it does, it knows exactly whose voice to use to call me back.